Hi, everyone. I am Megan Haught. I am with UCF Library Student Learning and Engagement and Research and Information Services departments. I handle a lot of the diversity-related programming through the libraries, as well as our social media accounts. And I thank you for coming to Women in Academia in the Time of COVID. This panel originally was going to be just a Women in Academia panel last year, but it was scheduled for a week after we ended up going remote. So we have revamped it to be able to have a broader discussion about what our experiences have been during the pandemic and remote learning and remote schooling. So thank you for joining us. As part of the general housekeeping for the panel, I'd like to have everybody remain muted. And then if you have a question you would like to be brought forward during the question and answer period, please put it into the chat and I will make sure it gets asked. And as we get started now, we're gonna go in alphabetical order for our panelists to introduce themselves. We have Dr. RoSusan Bartee with Educational Leadership and Higher Education.
Hello, everyone. And I'm so excited about being here today and look forward to a robust conversation.
Would you like to share any additional information about yourself that people might find interesting and kind of what you do?
Of course. Again, I am RoSusan Bartee, and I serve as the chair of the Department of Educational Leadership and Higher Education. I am completed my third year here in the department, and I came here from the University of Mississippi by way of Washington, D.C. and Illinois. And so I'm excited about the work that I get to do here in the department with faculty and staff and students. And again, I look forward to having this conversation. A little fun fact about me, that piano that's in the background actually does get played. I'm a trained classical pianist, and I enjoy being able to tickle those ivories during my more creative moments.
Thank you. Nessette Falu from Anthropology.
Afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And thank you so much for this invitation, Megan. Haught from last year, kind of returning back to this full circle. Yeah, I'm assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology here at UCF. Obviously, I think we're all here from UCF. I am in my fourth year. My work focuses on Brazilian Black lesbians' experiences with gynecology at the intersections of prejudice, race, gender, sexuality, and other things. And I am from New York City. I identify as a Black queer feminist, and I love ocean, rivers, and lakes.
Great. Thank you. And I should mention that every one of these fantastic and amazing women who will be speaking today all have their doctoral degrees. And next is Amelia Lyons with history.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I am a specialist of modern France, and in particular of gender, race, immigration, colonization, decolonization, and the welfare state. And I look at the intersections of those, in particular by studying Algerian family migration to France in the middle of the 20th century and the last decades of French colonial control of Algeria and in the early post-colonial era. I also run our History MA program, and certainly that keeps me very busy with all of our graduate students. And I guess, fun fact, if you watch Spectrum 13 News today, you'll see me do a little in-depth, which I think is about 5 minutes, interview on the history of Women's History Month. So, multiple things apparently for our Women's History Month going on just today.
Thank you. Next, we have Leandra Preston, who's with Women and Gender Studies.
I am as a senior lecturer with Women's and Gender Studies. I've been at UCF for almost 20 years. I was in English originally, but I am now teaching many different classes in Women's and Gender Studies, mostly online, even before COVID. I also do much of my research focused around body technologies, gender and body technologies, and virtual communities related to bodies and, you know, material bodies. And I do a lot of other things. I started a nonprofit that fosters pets for people in domestic violence shelters in 2007, I believe. So I've been wearing many hats, and now I'm wearing solo parent hat. And I had told some of them earlier that I am sitting in the parking lot of the playground near my daughter's school. So I apologize for any interruptions in advance, but it was appropriate for the topic today. So that's not why I did it, but it just interfered with school pickup. So thank you all very much for coming today.
And of course, Dr. Linda Walters from biology.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to see some faces I haven't seen in a while. That just makes me really happy on a Friday. I can say that my research field is conservation and restoration biology, and my focus is on the East Coast of Florida. And we are currently looking for some community volunteers to come help us stabilize some shorelines. So please let me know. We lost most of our volunteer pool with COVID. It used to not be an issue getting people to help. Now we're just trying to regain our footing. Fun fact, I am writing my 10th children's book right now. We have given out over 85,000 copies of our marine conservation books for free. So if you come help me, I can give you some books. But I am thrilled to be here. We've been celebrating Women's History Month at UCF for a long time now. Lots of women have been celebrated. That also makes me really happy. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Megan.
All right, thank you. And we do have a few questions that we've already put together to ask our panelists. The first one goes to RoSusan. And while faculty have had some flexibility and work hours and time spent on campus pre-pandemic, staff and administrators have not necessarily had this same option. Is this something you see changing now that remote work was available during the pandemic, building related closures? And it's something you think that will be fully feasible for UCF?
Thank you, Megan, for that question. And I think it is one that is very important, given the fact of the matter that COVID does not care if you are a faculty member, if you are a student, or if you are an administrator. It does not discriminate. And so with that in mind, regarding the work of an administrator, we have had some degree of flexibility with regards to how we are required to be on campus and the number of days that we are on campus. And so it is good that the university recognizes that COVID does not discriminate, and we too deserve and should have some level of flexibility. One of the things within our College of Community Innovation and Education, perhaps like in other colleges, we have determined which of our department chairs in our suites would be coming onto campus so that we would not exceed the number of persons that can be in a respective place, given those dimensions of that place. And so that has worked out well. My colleagues and I, we have been able to alternate schedules, and some days I may not be able to go on the day that I said I was going to go in, then they would go in on that day. And so it has worked out very well where we have been able to have that kind of flexibility. And so in terms of what will happen in the future, I'm not certain as to whether or not that type of schedule will be maintained. But what I will say is that for all of us, I think it is important, whether administrator or not, that we come to see COVID as, in many ways, trying to show us a different way of living and what that means. And so I don't think we should go back to business as usual after having gone through this or continuing to go through it. There are some lessons to be learned, but there has been flexibility allowed with administrators, just as there has been flexibility allowed for students and staff and other stakeholders.
Thank you. Any other of the panelists like to add any other comments or statements?
I wanted to add that it's, it's been a really terrible way to make things more accessible for people who maybe didn't, have that, and for various reasons. I'm thinking, just even as a parent, like to have more things available via Zoom has been really beneficial for me personally, as I'm able to do so much more. And I feel that may be the possibility, or at least making that an option, always having a Zoom component or something in a, campus events would be really, if possible, but I think that these are questions we obviously should have been asking a long time ago. So other, people outside of COVID who need access for other reasons benefit.
And that's very true. And I understand with that, since I've got an autoimmune disease and multiple other chronic illnesses, being able to work from home has made such an impact on my energy levels and the amount of pain I'm in on any given day. And it is something I'd like to have continue as an option for not being required to be in the building just to be in the building. With the next question, both Amelia and Leandra have asked to be able to talk about this, but personal lives and work have interacted and overlapped more since the start of remote work and schooling. How do you decide when to give more attention to one thing over the other? And if you're a parent, how has having your children at home for remote learning impacted your own teaching and work?
I will start, as I'm, doing basically, this is how I made it work by, I'm just doing what I have to do. I really feel like sometimes I'm flying by the seat of my pants, but because I don't have another parent, I'm the only parent, I have sole custody. And so I do have a community, but during COVID, that community has been taken out from under us as well in many ways, because you can't just send your children to people's houses during, when, especially, during the pandemic. So I don't think I've ever been more grateful for my phone, because I can use every spare moment, take her to the playground and do my work as much as I can on the phone. Flexibility, being able to, being a night owl has worked to my benefit as well, because, I'm able to do things when everything is quiet, because when she was home doing e-learning, she's in kindergarten. Now she's in first grade, but she started e-learning in kindergarten. So it was incredibly challenging. I could not, she wasn't self-sufficient at all. And so I literally could not, and her year started when our semester started. And I was teaching, these 4 classes online, different classes online with, a kindergartner. And it was much more impossible than I could have ever imagined. And I don't know if it was a coincidence, but I do not believe it was a coincidence that my evaluation suffered. I was going up and down escalator. I just couldn't keep it all going. And I was trying. I did what I needed to do, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And, I got low evaluations, which was hard because, I know consistently I have quality evaluations. We all know you're going to have the, highs and lows, but there were so many immense challenges, and then dealing with students' emotional and their own struggles. I really humanized myself as much as I could to them. I, reminded them that I was also in this pandemic and that I respected where they were. And I tried to connect with them in that way so that they knew that, we are people too. And I told them what I was dealing with, and that I did have a kindergartner. And so if I did respond more at night, then perhaps, that was just to be expected. You may get a lot of communication at night. And I had a student complain that I was being too personal and sharing my personal, like basically making excuses, because I was telling them it was in advance. So it really wasn't an excuse, but it was just very challenging, trying to strike that balance and being critiqued regardless. I felt that if I just didn't respond, until later in the evening, maybe what was right to do, to tell them or not. And I chose to be, share my experiences. And, some students didn't like it and many students appreciated it very much. But I think women find themselves caught between these kind of, the old saying, rock and a hard place kind of thing. Like when I read the question and it says, you know, when do you choose to focus on one over the other? I mean, it's literally just out of sheer necessity, you know, like when I have to go pick her up from school, I had to go, realizing it was going to conflict with this meeting. And so I decided, you know, this is how we're going to make it work, and just figured it out. And so I'm ready for it to change, you know, even them being back in school, it's still, you're dealing with some of the emotional issues, a lot less playtime for them with peers and things like that. So it's definitely a challenge that I always would be open to speaking with other people about, just to vent and share, because it's really thrown my life for quite a loop, you know, and I know everybody else is feeling that. So I know Amelia has a lot to say about this as well.
Sure, I can jump in. I started thinking about this question ahead of time in the sense of, you know, work-life balance. And I think the struggle of work-life balance is not a new struggle, but I do think COVID has heightened it. And I started thinking back to an article by Helen Lewis in The Atlantic that I read sort of at the start of all of this. I think it appeared almost exactly a year ago. And she made this really interesting point based on research done about the Ebola, Zika, and several of the SARS outbreaks, and argued, right, that these crises that we've had in the last decade or so, and work done on them, have shown that they've had a deep and lasting effect on gender equality, right? We know now, as well as in those cases, that, you know, women lose income, they lose their jobs at higher rates, have to stay at home, right? They have the kind of issues that we're talking about. And that in all of those cases, and the studies done on all of those other cases, that after the crisis ended, men's income returned to pre-crisis levels, and oftentimes women's took either longer or never really recovered. And those are just the sort of tangible things we can measure, not all of the intangible things that we're not measuring, really. And I think, you know, when we talk about this, we also have to keep in mind that that race compounds these issues, right? We know from our experience in the last year, and from studying the pandemic a century ago in 1918 and 1990, that marginalized communities and communities of color have suffered at an exponentially larger rate. You know, one of our students in our program, he finished his undergraduate honors thesis in spring of 2020 and has had a couple of articles in the Sentinel and that. And he did this amazing work studying how in the American South, and in particular in Florida, while white and Black Floridians got the flu at about the same rate, mortality rates among African Americans were significantly higher for all of the reasons we know, right? The systemic and structural reasons. Jim Crow made the pandemic more deadly. And you know, we're obviously seeing that in the present as well. And we've had, you know, a lot of change since then. And I don't know, I was thinking about, you know, I wanted to ground what I wanted at my comments, but I also wanted to ground them in the sense that whatever troubles I've had, I don't think I feel comfortable ever comparing them to what frontline workers, what low wage workers have suffered. I have job security, and even with all of the times I've, you know, sat in front of my computer and cried because I can't keep it all going. I feel like I'm lucky, right? I'm very aware of my own privilege through all of this, and the balancing act, you know, has been increasingly difficult. I think I run our MA program, as I said, and so the amount of time I'm spending with those students, not even the ones in my classes, has increased exponentially, right? Their needs. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, have increased a whole lot. And I feel like I've had almost no time to do anything related to my research. And I have two boys, a middle schooler, 8th grader, 14, and a second grader, 7, both have done remote schooling this whole year and are, you know, like just today had one of those moments where my 7-year-old called for me. I was in the middle of something. I came into his office where he is, because I'm of course the nomad. I go from the dining room table to the office out here and kind of move around depending on what I'm doing so I can keep an eye on them. And I said, well, why did you call me if you don't really need me? And I heard the teacher say, Mark, you're not on mute. Not using the kind of patient mom voice that I would have liked to have been using. So, you know, we all have those moments. And when folks ask me, I say, well, this year, in addition to what I usually do, I'm also the TA at home and I'm the lunch lady. And I feel that, right, that balance. And I think, like Leandra, at the beginning of the school year, when my 7-year-old didn't know how to navigate anything on his computer, I really was at a point of exasperation. I thought, how am I going to do this? I'm not going to be able to do this. And thank goodness he has a great teacher. Thank goodness he can figure it out. And there are still times that he needs me to help him with things when he needs multiple things open at the same time, or if they go to a new place. He definitely needs help, but at least I have, I think, gotten more used to tuning out, or that kind of parent, you know, when you have little ones, where even when you're sleeping, you know when you have to wake up. And I think my work has kind of shifted in that way, where I know with the 14-year-old, if I hear giggling, he's no longer in class and he's watching a YouTube video. And I know with the 7-year-old, if I hear lots of noises or moving around, that he's gotten up and he's gone to the other side of the office where we have a table with Legos on it for him when he takes a break. And he's at the Lego table and not in class. And so I still have to kind of always be thinking about the two of them, even while I'm working. I even have my work day. In fact, I specifically requested classes from 3 o'clock on, so that I could be with my kids working in the house and kind of paying attention, and then try to do most of my things from 3 o'clock on, when thankfully I have a babysitter who is a great help, and who did, for long periods, did remote babysitting on the iPad with my 7-year-old, which was the most amazing thing ever. Destiny Johnson, she's a UCF student. She's going to be graduating soon. And she was just so creative with getting my 7-year-old engaged with her, and not having him looking at the screen all last summer and a big chunk of the school year this year too. So,
thank you. I want to make a comment to I thank you so much for everything you said, but you made a couple important points that, you know, primarily was that regardless of, you know, how challenging it was managing to balance work with everything else, was being, you know, grateful to have work when so many people were out of work. More people, and, you know, people of color have been dealing with so many of these inequity issues for such a long time that, you know, I think some of us got a piece of what people have been dealing with for so very long and trying to, you know, do it all. But also, I wanted to comment that, you know, when you were talking about the rooms and where you go, it's, you know, the space is such an important piece of this as well, that, you know, I was grateful to have an upstairs and a downstairs. I have quite a small townhouse, but at least we had 2 floors. And so there are many people, you know, whether it's in cities or, you know, multifamily homes, you know, that they don't have that access to even space to do the things that they needed to do. So I was also grateful to have those things. And then the children, they've been very adaptable. Yeah, first grade was a whole different ball game. You know, she was a pro by then. So, but yeah, I appreciate, you made a lot of important points. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, both of you, for your comments on this. And Sandy and a few others have added in that having to be all the things plus their jobs, about how difficult that's been. Nessette, How do the changing job duties and responsibilities, because they do keep changing all the time now that we're remote, how do they affect how you're evaluated and how you're doing your job?
Thank you, Megan. And I am really, really pausing, which is just a sign of the times of how important this space is, right? The kind of vulnerability that that we're kind of exposing here, and just tapping into how much we swallowed, right, in the last year, just to keep moving. I'll say I have a few points, a few comments. I mean, my department of Anthropology has protected me significantly, not because of COVID, but as a pre-tenure track from significant service, and I'm very grateful for that. But I have seen both chair, administrators, faculty, staff, just obviously, as you've all experienced, the kind of increase exponentially in service, right? That's required. And as I watch and as I prepare to become, take on a lot of that service after, tenure, how thinking about that in COVID, right? I'm just reminded of the kind of conversations that were had prior to COVID, but also grew exponentially, but not enough about the ongoing labor effect, right? Of on the body, on the mind of all of those people, fatigue, depression. That also included men, right? At the university, losing family members, so forth and so on. But particularly women, people of color, right? That take on that take on significant service as a result of COVID, and all the changes that were required to be made quickly and ongoingly. And the kind of social fatigue, right, as a result of COVID, social politically, and the other kind of state violence that that were very palpable last year, like any other year, but and even ongoing now, right, as we know from Atlanta and Colorado. But nonetheless, but I will say, I mean, teaching and publication, just briefly, like I think about changes in duties with teaching, and how we talk about measuring evaluation with what becomes our duty, right? In COVID, what became new duties in COVID, where teaching needed to be different, right? Connecting to students needed to be different, making that kind of environment and platform a learning and still kind of breathing environment, and vigorous and giving space and all of that, and how on the one hand, teaching is our duty and our job, but how other things became new duties, right? As a result of needing to create that both pedagogically and kind of care, right? That you can impromptu or think about and give to students along the way, and still kind of giving boundaries to yourself, right? Because the wear and tear on us, students feel that, right? And so I think about that, and so I think about also, now having gone through, 1CP post COVID, what it would mean moving forward to really write that into how we write and evaluate ourselves, right? Those kind of hidden duties, and the kind of shapings that students, cannot, it's hard to measure the kind of student gratitude, right? And the student engagement that students demonstrate, especially for me in anthropology, where I'm teaching heavy classes on social issues, medical anthropology of racism. I mean, teaching those two classes smack middle of COVID, and what became a big anti-racist movement you know, was really quite an undertaking. But then again, you know, making room to really, you know, as Bill Hooks would say, you know, transgress the space, you know, was really kind of a shift in what is my duty, right, as a teacher in this moment. And I just don't think, right, that the rubrics, right, for, you know, for that I use to measure is really has ever been enough, and certainly not at this time. And kind of like, you know, narrating like what is that human impact on students, not based on what they've said in an email, a thank you email, or some other commentary, but truly the kind of trust that's required of the experience of how the faculty describe their experience, right, you know, and kind of like, and what that is generating in the classroom. And then, I mean, the other thing, I mean, I'm on a teaching leave right now, kind of, you know, my contract negotiations, and I'm also grateful for that. But last year, I smack in the middle of it all, I got book reviews, my first round of book reviews for my manuscript. And it was critical for me to get that manuscript really up and going. And, you know, there's a kind of myth around, really is, you know, that me, single, no children, live alone, has a lot of freedom, and I can undertake everything and do everything, right, and everything is going to be fine as opposed to someone. And I'm really sensitive to people who do not have that kind of, be able to make the choices, free choices with how they spend their time. But, you know, publishing for me really deserves a whole nother conference like this on what it really, how do we measure the kind of depth that it took to, you know, to get everything out the door at the quality level, right, through the kind of mental fatigue that was going on last year. And the last thing I will just say is that what it reminded me of is the only thing that got me through to resubmitting my manuscript and getting an article out and all these other things was really the kind of gratitude about, you know, you know, the kind of work that I do, right? Which is, again, the kind of value that we want from the university about, you know, our work, right? You know, and so a re-engagement of how I reevaluate myself was really what saved the day for me. And maybe that would be the case for others.
Would any of the other panelists like to add any other comments for this? I'm trying to give slightly longer pauses because I don't know, it always takes a moment to unmute and for it to completely process in the system. And our service duties, even on like the staff end with me, have changed so dramatically. When we first went remote, I handled the licensing for one of our streaming video vendors. And it used to be, I would have maybe an hour a day for 2 weeks around the start of the semester each year, like across the 3 semesters. And it became 4 to 5 hours a day for a significant period of time. And we went through 3 years of licenses and 7 months as part of this. And just the load of making sure everything's processed, everything's set up for our faculty as they're teaching online. But it does help, yes, like you said, with like the gratitude that they've shown for, thank you for helping me get this worked out. Thank you for showing me how to use this feature online. I've never had to teach that way before. So it has been a fantastic thing, even though it's also been a massive mental load to carry as well. RoSusan, we've talked some with this, how hallway conversations can be both positive and negative, but they've always been a major part of accomplishing goals in academia. How is it different now, and what adjustments have you made to accommodate the lack of casual interactions that we used to have?
Yes, I tell you, that's a big one, because communication, conversations are very much so a part of our lives, and not being able to engage in them in the ways that we have before has required an adjustment. I am on the phone more. I have, once I realized that seemingly COVID was not going away, I have now incorporated Zooming as a part of the way in which I have conversations. I am now even more tuned in to sort of the nonverbals of the conversations. Before, it seemingly was conversations for the sake of conversations, or not giving a whole lot of thought to what was not being said or what the tone was not communicating. And so now my antennas are up in a very different way, in that that's the only interactions that we have are the conversations that are more now formalized, in that we don't have the informal interactions that being on campus can provide for. And so I found myself being more intentional about responding to what was not said as opposed to what was said, and realizing that it's more in that, in terms of what is being communicated and less in the spoken word. And so I think when we lose one sense for as a comparative, when we think about our 5 senses, another sense seemingly becomes more heightened. And I think that with COVID, we have lost that physical distance, but we don't really have to be socially distant. We don't really have to be socially distant. Of course, we need to be physically distant, but we don't have to be socially distant, because there are a number of technological platforms that we're able to use to maintain that. And I think we've been able to access them in very important ways. But the conversational piece is key, and just figuring out and listening more intently, as opposed to talking more intently, listening more intently to what is really not being said based upon what is being verbalized. And so I think that has been an important part of it, that it has taught me to do in terms of adjusting to what this new reality is, because I don't think it's going to totally go back to where it was before, and I really don't think it should go back to totally where it was before, because this has been life altering, and we won't be the same. We won't enter the interactions that we have before in the same way than we do now, during, and then one day post-COVID. So I think that's what I have come to understand about the conversations and how we deal both from the formal and the informal. But it's tough. It's tough, and I'm steadily evolving in this process. But I would like to believe I'm trending forward, onward, and upward.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add any other comments? Over this pause, because I can see people, I'm like, were they moving to unmute themselves? Right. Linda, with everything that's different now, how do you track your own goals and evaluating if you're actually even just accomplishing anything? How have you readjusted your own priorities and mindset on how you view your work and your personal life?
Thanks, Megan. I can say that I've been a mess. I'm better now, but there are months when I was working at the weirdest hours, and I would like miss nights because I would just cycle through further and further, because I am a late night person like Leandra. And all of a sudden I realized, crap, it's 6 in the morning and I didn't go to bed, and I still have yesterday's pajamas on. But I am a little bit better now. But what I realized about myself is I was very intentional about what I did on campus and what I did not on campus. And I really tried to do about 90% of my work on campus. And I would go in on Saturdays or Sundays if I needed to, but I really liked the structure of my office. I loved my office, and I knew where everything was, and it just worked for me. When I was at school, I worked. When I was at home, I would do some work, but I would be really good about doing only work I really loved. So something related to my research, or writing something, writing a kid's book, or getting ready for some community event, that kind of thing, that I didn't consider that work. So I was okay with that. I will also say I have a son, but he's 24 and working on his own PhD. So I have honestly no idea how I would have dealt with Josh if he was in elementary or middle school. I really give anybody and everybody kudos who've homeschooled their kids over the long haul. But I lost my balancing position, which was being able to go to campus. So what I realized, my goals, I am a list maker. I have the semester list, the monthly list, the weekly list, and the daily list. I have them all right in front of me, so I can check off as many things as possible. But what I realized in that working through all my lists, I had nothing on them that had to do with anything that wasn't work. And I am 75 steps away from my bed, whenever I chose to go to bed. So there was no exercise happening. I used to park really far from my office, so I would get some exercise in, or walking to all the various meetings on campus. I've sat in this seat that I'm in right now in my dining room for about 7 hours today on Zoom meetings, and that's really bad. So what I'm trying to get better and better about doing is putting on my list things that actually aren't work, so that I can cross them off. But I've gone shopping for an Easter present for my mother-in-law, or actually taking a walk around the neighborhood. If I put them on the list, I'll do them. But if I don't, the time just passes. And Zoom has changed that. And a lot of people just want to talk, make the social connection, like RoSusan said. And I don't pay attention to time well enough to know that I really should have cut that off, especially with students. So I think I'll stop there.
I hear you on the lists. I've got like a notebook next to me that's like broken out like a page is a week, and here's like things I need to check off and remember to do. But to be able to do non-work things, I had to start putting 15-minute breaks on my calendar with like reminders to pop up, so I can be like, okay, I'm going to do a quick workout. And I've been doing like really slobbery workouts on YouTube, which are like 5 to 7 minutes, most of them. So you can do a quick, short, like ab workout or something. Because I did an ab workout this morning through part of that, because I'm trying to do abs on Mondays and Fridays. And it's just, without that reminder popping up of you need to get up and go do something, it's not happening. Without it, I'm just literally sitting at this exact same spot for 8 straight hours. And it's tough.
I like the idea of the list, like putting those types of self-care things, I mean, elevating them to the importance that they should be given, you know. And I'm not saying that I do that, but I should do that. It's really important, because if we're not well, then we can't do all of these things. So we really need to think about ourselves, and I need to think about myself. So thank you. I like that idea a lot, Linda.
And Amelia, I know we've addressed this some already, but a lot of students, faculty, and staff have started hitting the pandemic wall and feeling like they've just been in crisis mode for so long, they're losing the ability to cope. What have you been doing to help them, and how does it differ between coworkers and students?
So really right away in March of last year, I started to think about some of the ways that we could keep students engaged, you know, some in a more formal, but also even in the way we were talking about a few minutes ago with the comments RoSusan made about the kind of, you know, informal conversations, the water cooler kind of moments. And so since March, and we're continuing to do it to this day, we have Zoom drop-in meetings every week for the students in our MA program. We changed when they were, you know, in the spring 2020, and then summer, fall, and now we've kind of, I think, had new ideas about them. At first, they were just, I would have a Zoom meeting once a week, and any student could come. I would just remind them every week, the day of, because, you know, everybody's in front of that screen, as we know, so they'd remember to come. And it was a really, in the first, you know, between 3 and 6 months, a place where for a lot of students, this was one of the few kinds of interactions they were having with other people during the week. I did some of that as well with other faculty. Similarly, wanting to make sure that faculty I knew who were living by themselves were having regular interactions. We had sort of a coffee one that was on Friday mornings all last summer, had others that were more happy hour in nature. And I think the ones for the students now, the way we're doing them a little bit differently is that twice a month, they are completely student-led. We had, of course, all female students who volunteered to run them. And that way they can talk to each other without a faculty member in the room. And I think that's really important as well. You know, we are trying to approximate those moments at the end of class where our students can come up and talk to you, but you also, you know, need to have those moments where they talk to each other where you're not around. And particularly this year that we have new students in the program who haven't really known our normal face-to-face master's program. I think that's been really important. And then the other thing we added in was that not only is it just me or Dr. French, our Director of Public History, who hosts them, but we have a guest faculty member, because that way each time we have one of the meetings with the faculty, there's a different person that students who maybe are nervous about reaching out to or talking to have a chance to sort of meet them and can then set up another kind of meeting. So we've been doing that kind of thing. You know, at the beginning of the year, we usually have a welcome and a welcome back, depending if they're new students or in their second year of the program. And, you know, we couldn't do pizza, obviously, or any other kinds of refreshments, but we did a Kahoot, right? One of these quizzes that you might be familiar with. And we asked faculty in advance to send a piece of trivia about themselves that nobody would know. Or a childhood picture. And it was really fun. You know, the faculty and the staff and the students all participated. It created a nice space for those kinds of things. Of course, as I'm sure you all are as well, we're dealing with and helping students who are in crisis much more often, right, than we were before. Even if, you know, I certainly had worked with, you know, places like CARES or the Knights Pantry or the other UCF services before, you know, I have done a student of concern or well checks before, but I've been involved in many more of them this year. And so I think I'm also much more proactive about making sure students are aware of those kinds of services if they need them. I also realized one of my colleagues had done this when she was teaching in the summer last year, that she just stayed in the Zoom meeting after until the last student left. And I realized that that also really gives them that chance to talk one-on-one or with just a couple other students in a way that approximates that activity at the end of a classroom in a face-to-face setting. And in my grad class, which I taught in the fall, at the end of each class, I transferred the hosting status to one of the students at the end of class every week. And so they could stay in it without me and again, talk to each other, you know, because for the last several years as grad director in our kind of cornerstone historiography class, I would always invite a panel of more advanced students to talk to students about their experience and to give them advice, and then I would encourage them to take them over to Lazy Moon Pizza so that they could, you know, have that conviviality and collegiality. And so this gave a little bit of a chance at that. You know, they're master's students. They're all, you know, at home and of age, and if they wanted to, you know, have an adult beverage with their classmates at 9:30 at night after class, I thought that why not give them that space to do it and make it easy for them to do it. And like this event, right, which was supposed to happen last year in a face-to-face setting, we've been doing a whole lot of different things. You know, we transferred some events last spring, like things for UCF Celebrates the Arts got transferred into a virtual setting. In July, we did a Black Lives virtual teach-in with a number of my colleagues across the campus. We've done our workshops, how to get into grad school workshop with the grad fair, all virtually. So I think a lot of these things make a big difference. And in some cases, when it's really a subject that has a lot of resonance, we end up with a really large audience. So the Black Lives virtual teach-in last July, between Zoom and I think it was either YouTube Live or Facebook Live, there were over 500 people who watched it live. And I haven't even checked recently to see how many thousand have seen it since. So I think that we've talked about this a little bit already, that these kinds of the kind of flexibility this allows not only gives more people the chance to participate, but allows them to come from a much wider area if we do our advertising well, and they can be seen later because we can keep them in these repositories. We can archive them, right? And so I think that's helpful. And I think we'll probably go back to something that's maybe more hybrid, where we do have the live event, but that we might maybe more have the ability and the know-how to simulcast, right? To have it on Zoom and in the room. Because I would feel bad if every speaker we invited to UCF in the future, was doing their talk from wherever their office in whatever university they're in, and we never got anyone to come to campus, because that does, I think, matter in the same way that, it's great if you can do a virtual conference, but it's not the same as really being there and doing a conference for lots of intangible reasons. So anyway.
And actually, I'm in a grad program as well. I'm actually in educational leadership. And one of my faculty members over the summer did just like a couple of random open Zoom conversations. And she's like, I'll be here to talk as long as anybody wants. And most of the class showed up, and we chatted about the program. We chatted of where we were, who had taken what classes, and talked about the experience of those classes, because it was a fully online program even before COVID, and just talked and joked, and being able to have that experience made the class so much better. And it's something I wish more faculty members did. I can see both Linda and Leandra unmuted. Did you have something else you wanted to add with that?
Well, it kind of blends into, what I was going to talk about a little bit, which I may or may not have time to, but that I really appreciate that in my own meetings and things, and how well it's been going, and just connecting with people, that I have been thinking a lot about integrating that into my classes. And actually a graduate student yesterday was saying, gosh, I wish we could have the, in-class conversation about this book, because it's really kind of complex, and it's, it's more challenging, and it's just, I can host the Zoom meetings, but they're not required. And so, but then we can record them, but then, it's just, but I'm wondering if, maybe they can start doing like a Zoom mediated class, you know what I mean? Something cool like that, where it's like, they have to be on once a week for a Zoom meeting, and then they can connect with each other. But there are a lot of really, just creative things that have been implemented that I would like to see, continue and us to integrate. And it's good to hear that from you, Megan, because that encourages me more to do that for my students.
Mine are, it is required, right? My classes are not, the ones I'm talking about are not online classes. They're what we have been calling this year B1, right? So they're the remote equivalent to face-to-face. So that's still, they're synchronous. Okay. They're just synchronous here instead of on campus.
I would like that personally, but I think that would be cool.
Especially a mixed mode one.
Yes, and I'm in Cocoa Beach, so it's always nice if I don't to be in the car for 2 hours for an hour-long meeting, or for an hour and 15-minute long class. It's kind of nice to not have to drive over there.
And one of the things too, to further the conversation that we did in my department, was we recently had a retreat, and I called it Retreat Reimagined. And this reimagining of a retreat involved all of our faculty and staff receiving a gift box that had been prepared for them, and they were to open the gift box at a particular time on the day that we all convened around the lunch hour. And that was a way to have us think outside the box, where I encourage both mindfulness and mindlessness. So whatever that meant for that day was what we were going to do. And it was they had food items and they had games, but wherever that led us to was the place that we were going to journey. I didn't really have any expectations, but it showed a different way of trying to relate, because I thought that was very important to do that. And then we would have some monthly check-ins to just have an opportunity to talk about what was going on. And I humanized myself. I said, you know, it's tough, right? This is tough. Even it's tough, irrespective. Again, COVID does not discriminate. It does not care who you are, what position you hold, nothing, right? And so because of that, that becomes a commonality that all of us share, that we are all subject to this in many ways. But yeah, just being able to think outside the box in more creative facets to connect with people has been very important. And given my role and I feel like responsibility, I had to get over myself. I had to get through myself, because still there were folk in my department that needed to be served. And so that part too, I think, made me come to realize the great responsibility that, in spite of that, we have, and also the great privilege too that we have, because we could all shelter in at our homes. And so that too was a point where I realized that, you know, even in the midst of, there's still so much to be thankful for.
Mm-hmm. And we are pushing up on 4 o'clock, but as long as people are willing to stick around for a little while, we've got a couple more questions to go over. And then if anybody wants to add any questions in through the chat, that'll be great too. I can easily flex my hours. And that's been one of the great things about working remote, is I can flex my hours as needed for this. But we do have a couple more questions we had planned to address. Linda, with the announced return to normal for the fall 2021 semester, how do you feel about returning to campus? Will the old normal come back, or do we have a new normal going forward?
My answer on that keeps evolving. And if you'd asked me 6 weeks ago about everybody going back to campus in August, I would say, no, I don't want to. I don't want to be around a bunch of people who could make me sick, but yeah, everybody's getting vaccinated now. I actually feel pretty comfortable saying that by August, every person who wants a vaccine will have gotten it. And we won't be going back to normal, but we're going to go back to better. I need the energy of campus. I hate my dining room now, and I used to love my dining room, because it is, it's just this area where I just work by myself, and my husband kind of peters through occasionally. But the energy of campus and the being able to be a part of something that you weren't expecting to be a part of while walking across campus, seeing, I don't know, a bunch of people playing music or dancing or something going on in the puddle or whatever. I thrive on that. And I have not thrived on not having to deal with it. So I'm super excited. I'm fully expecting every class to have a Zoom component. They're supposed to be putting in all that equipment right now. That's what they said at Faculty Senate yesterday. So every room, I know it's not really going to happen, but right now I can at least think that every room is going to be Zoom or something compatible. There are a whole bunch of competitors out there for Zoom right now that are more geared toward education. So maybe we'll have that. There have been some questions about things like creative school going back to normal. And Mike Johnson did say, he's the provost, he did say that is going to be one of his top priorities right now. He didn't know what was going on there, but faculty have become really concerned, including Bridget. And I don't blame you that they are not back to full hours, but we're expecting faculty to do full hours. So some of that should be changing on that day-to-day better plan. So I also expect that we will have hand sanitizer everywhere for the rest of our time. We probably won't hug people as much as we used to, which is kind of sad, but I don't know, I guess that's okay. And a few other things like that. But, you know, some faculty in my department have had major life changes this year and I just missed it. And again, that just kind of makes me sad or makes me feel stupid, or I don't know what it makes me feel, but I feel out of it. And I don't like being out of it. I mean, campus is a way of life. That's why we all became academics and we need it again.
So I did enjoy missing Spirit Splash this year, because in the library with all the music in front of the building, it's a lot for an afternoon. And I had a Zoom meeting with one of my student workers going over something for a display, and you could hear the thumbing in the background. And she's like, "Sorry, Spirit Splash is happening." I'm like, "Okay." At least it's quieter this year.
I love a good Spirit Splash, but it doesn't impact me that much in biology. My building doesn't shake. I will say I need to go off to another Zoom meeting now. So I think it's been wonderful seeing you all and hearing your stories, and that we are all in this together, I guess, with slightly different tweaks on how it all works. And the energy of August is soon upon us. So thank you for organizing it, Megan.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's been such a great chance to be able to see other people's faces and put faces to the names, because I've been emailing with most of you for years now.
All right, take care. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Bye. You too. Leandra, if you still got some time, would you like to talk about what changes you'd like to see higher education make in general for the future, and any short-term changes that we made for the pandemic that you'd like to see stay on?
Yeah, I spoke to it a little bit actually already, because I found, okay, so I wanted to mention that I feel like I adapted in a sense. I went through this, you know, on a much nicer scale when I started teaching online. I felt so disconnected. I felt so, you know, all of these different things, like how do I do this if I'm not there? You know, how do I do this if we're not meeting? And I felt quite prepared to make these adjustments in that sense. And I feel I've adapted a bit to kind of the isolation that I was feeling, and that I don't mind that as much. I just feel I'm so busy all the time, and, you know, I get this great emotional fulfillment, of course, from my small child, but I really like the Zoom component. I would like to see courses that are fully web-based with integrated, you know, a mediated Zoom or online component, like where we are actually having discussions. For women's and gender studies, it would be invaluable. It's really challenging to do some of what I do and maintain what we get in the classroom. So I really hope that we continue integrating and exploring, you know, changing some course structures to, you know, integrate some of these technologies. That's probably my number one thing that I'm hoping. And like I had mentioned before, I really hope that I can continue having my meetings from Zoom, because it just saves me so much time. And, you know, and then I will come to campus for my office hours and my teaching and whatnot, but I just really, for my, you know, managing my schedule, it's been immensely helpful to save a 2-hour drive for a 1-hour meeting, you know, once a month or twice or 3 times a month. I mean, you know, just for my faculty meetings. So it just, those things. And I think a lot of it has to do with accessibility. You know, it's about making it and keeping it accessible for everyone. You know, some people, the accessibility issue lies in the technology. Some people, the accessibility issue lies in going to campus, you know, whether it's a time management or an ability issue. And so I think by meeting all, you know, providing all of these options when possible, now that we've been forced to do it, we should continue doing it. And so that's really my number one answer to that question. So.
Thank you. And I know a number of people have had to step off, but while we still have us here as we're recording, I'd just like to ask the final question of what are you doing to keep yourself healthy mentally and physically? And this is for everybody still in the room.
I'm an avid exerciser, so I walk an hour a day, and that keeps me physically engaged in terms of dealing with my physical health. And so I think it impacts my mental health as well. And so the exercise, meditation, Bible reading, praying, those are all part of the things that I do. It's a variety of things, talking on the phone, engaging with my family and my friends.
At the start of it, my neighbor who had been away at her brother's to receive leukemia treatment moved home. So she had been gone for almost a year, and she arrived right about the middle of March and back at her house. And she has a beautiful dog. And so I volunteered to walk her dog every morning. And so from March till August, I walked her dog every morning. It was just like ritual. It was great. And so I felt like I was getting exactly what you were just talking about. And then this semester started, and it kind of fell right off a cliff for me. And I wasn't really getting any of the kind of exercise. I wasn't going, obviously since March, haven't gone to the Y to work out. Those kinds of things kind of disappeared. And with all the other demands. And so it was really, again, this semester, because I had put on weight, that I started really focusing in. And I have a cousin and an aunt and uncle. And we're all kind of helping each other to stay on track. And I've lost about 14 pounds since January, just by really saying, no more of this. We're not going in this direction anymore. We're going to go in this direction. And, as you were saying, right, RoSusan, when you do that, your energy levels increase, your ability to focus, you're just not as, I don't know, yes, I still binge watch television. Sometimes I still just need that at a certain hour in the evening on certain nights. But, you've got to kind of search a little more because you've watched a lot more things than you would have expected you would have anyway. But I feel like that's not my go-to way to relax only anymore. And I think, for me, one of the other things in terms of the kind of activities with my kids has been reading aloud. My oldest, certainly I had not been reading out loud to him for quite a long time. And my 7-year-old, he was really able to read pretty well on his own by first grade. And so we kind of petered out the bedtime story. I was like, oh, this is the end. So I had proposed to him right before COVID that maybe we could read the Harry Potter books together. So it's like, I've never read them, kind of wanted to read them. I thought, I'm never going to read them unless we read them aloud. And my older one wanted to read them on his own. He was not interested in me reading them with him when he was that age. So we started reading them, and we read them all between basically February and October of 2020, all 7 of the books. And after we would read the book, we would watch the movie. And now we're all the way through the 3rd book on our 2nd time around. And we've added in other stuff, right? We're reading the Percy Jackson books on the Olympians and some other things too. And so I think that we're even at lunch, where I will give the boys their lunch, grab something for myself, and then there's about 20 minutes of their lunch periods that overlap. And so we'll get 20 minutes in, and we'll sit and read and aloud. And it's just that is the kind of thing I feel like eventually I will miss. There aren't a lot of things we're going to miss about COVID, but for me, clearly I will forever associate Harry Potter with COVID in a good way.
That's amazing that you read all those books like that. That is so incredible. I have been, I'm not an avid exerciser anymore. I need to be. I used to be. I always joke I haven't really exercised since I got pregnant. My daughter's 7, so it's kind of time to come back. I'm very active. I'm not like super sedentary, but I mean, I do. But my piece in Zen has been gardening. You know, I've always had an outside garden and loved gardening outside, but with the quarantine and the pandemic, when we were on lockdown type deal, I ramped it up and went a slightly overboard. I tend to do things like that. I've never been accused of, you know, doing things halfway. So yeah, I have a whole lot of plants, but I really enjoy it so much. It's peaceful. And now I've got an Instagram of plant with only my plants, and I've got like 2,300 followers already. It's amazing. So I've got this whole new little world I've created, and it's been really fun. So I enjoy photography, you know, doing the photographs and then the plants, and then I get the community out of it too. So that's been really nice to do. And
we did last year and this year, we did a butterfly garden, and we have all of these caterpillars. You know, they've already eaten all the milkweed, and now they're forming their chrysalises around the pots. And that was one that's now in a chrysalis. But we have, I think, 6 of them hanging from the pots where I had the milkweed. So yeah, that's fun. I mean, they look terrible, right? Because it's really cool when they open up, though. We've had butterflies too. And I try to do in my yard mostly Florida native plants, and I really try to do a lot of butterfly, you know, attractors too. It's really cool. Or caterpillar attractors, I should say. So the right kind of caterpillars, though. But thank you all so much. I'm going to go as well, but I enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Megan, for putting it together. And I missed your faces. I haven't seen any of you all in a while, so it's good to see you.
It's really good to see everyone. Thank you for joining us. And this recording will be added both to the library's YouTube page and to STARS.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend, ladies.
Right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.